So I'm going to record. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Thank you for coming. I have notes here that I'll be happy to share with you. I think these are them. Okay. Talking about days today. We do get into Revelation for a change, but there's still some underpinnings that have to happen, some foundational things that have to be understood before I can make a case. So we want to look at light and life to start out with, to put the foundation in. Light and life. We have a weekly cycle, 7 days. And as it turns out, I was taking a class in oceanography years ago. The professor was not a believer, but she gave me this. Hello, Liz.
Hi, I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
Okay. She gave me this. She said, if you go down to the ocean and just watch the waves, count the waves. She said, there's a rhythm to these waves. And you'll find, on average, that every seventh wave is larger than the rest. The professor told me that there's something to this rhythm. Sure enough, I went to the ocean and I watched the waves for a long time and I counted them. Not only did they average as being the larger wave every seventh one, but most of the time it was the seventh wave. That got me thinking about this cycle. People asking, has the Shabbat been lost in the meantime? Well, the only thing we can do biblically about that is to understand that when Israel was in the wilderness, they didn't lose it because of the quails. They knew when the Shabbat was, and it's my belief that it's never changed. And that the very idea of having a Shabbat that's on Monday or on Wednesday, or changing the Shabbat every month or 3 months because of the moon, just slays me how anyone could think that way. Yahweh's earth is very much in balance with the 7. And that's why I wanted to start with Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 1. We have in the first chapter and a little bit of the second, we have that cycle of 7 days. We have a creation there, if you can call it that. Really, I don't think any of those words in there say created. Some say made. Later on in chapter 2, it's formed for Adam and Eve. They weren't just made, they were formed and breathed into. But we understand that the 6 days is not necessarily a matter of literal days of creation. What we tried to get to in one of the earlier meetings on this was that these 7 days were the days it took for Yahweh, or in this case Elohim, to explain to Adam what was going on. He took 6 days to explain, and that's in another teaching, and that changes the whole record for me to read that and understand it, especially from the viewpoint of the Torah being written on cuneiform tablets. That another discovery that makes perfect sense to me. So Archbishop Usher, several hundred years ago, did the chronology of the scriptures. And he was able to set a particular date for the making of the universe. That is, let's put it this way, the beginning of salvation history. We know that the universe and our part of it has been going on and on and on for millions or billions of years, science tells us, and there's no reason to doubt that or to understand Genesis 1 in a literal fashion when the sun wasn't even made till the fourth day. Ussher, in his chronology, comes to the conclusion that the beginning of salvation history was 4004 BC. Of course, that's been modified since then. However, even the new modifications come close to 4004 BC. The end of salvation history, therefore, if we understand the 7 days of creation as 7 ages, I don't want to say dispensations, they're not, 7 ages of salvation history. And we reckon that Yahshua was born in 4 BC. Now it's looking like it's possible, if there were a year 0, to be 0, but 1 AD, because they have learned about a new eclipse. Josephus talks about Herod's death and an eclipse. So it's going to be 4 BC, or it's going to be 1, no 0. That puts Ussher's chronology on track with a 7-age cycle. If salvation history starts in about 4000 and Yahshua is born, well, shoot, we'll say 7,000, or starting at year 1. I haven't thought this out very good. Yahshua is born at the end of the 4th day, which would equate to 1 AD. And if these ages are 7, then we can pretty easily figure out where we are and where the apostles were and where the prophets were. And therefore, we can begin to put together a chronology of salvation in a more timely fashion, because remind me to buy eggs. I must have said something that turned Cortana on here. Where was I? This is hard enough. The scripture doesn't tell us anything before this. It hints at what the ages were like before, that they were commandeered by angels. And after the 7 ages of salvation history, there's nothing there either. And certainly it doesn't prove that there's an end of the world coming at a certain time. But if it is a matter of 7,000 years, then we can gauge, with a little help from our friend Barnabas, exactly where he was, where the apostles were, where Yeshua was, and where we are in the scheme of salvation history only. There's a prophetic aspect, or a sod aspect also, of chronology, especially this age idea that I'm talking about. And we find a way to interpret a sod meaning in Psalm 90 and another place in Scripture. Psalm 90 is a prayer of Moses, who we think, at least traditionally, that wrote the Torah. He's called a man of Elohim. Yahweh, thou hast been our dwelling place in all generations, before the mountains were brought forth, or ever thou hadst formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting. That should say, Ha'olam va'ed, you are Elohim. So we have now in the beginning of the prayer of Moses, kind of a structure that we're talking about, a creative act. Mountains before them, before the earth and the world. Thou turnest man back to the dust, and saith, Turn back, O children of men. For 1,000 years are in thy sight, are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. So we look at those 7 days of Genesis, Bereshith chapter 1, as each being a 1,000-year period that is a model for the sowed meaning of salvation history in chronological sense. So we get to the fourth day, and literally what it says concerning the fourth day in Genesis 1:14, Elohim says, Let there be lights in the firmament of the skies to separate the day from the night. So we have on the fourth day, Elohim modeling the sowed meaning here, modeling it by saying light is created on the fourth day. There's a literal fifth day too. That starts at Bereshith 1:20. Elohim said, Let the waters bring forth swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the firmament of the skies. So we see on the fifth day, literally, life comes forth from light on the fourth day. In a prophetic sense, we look to the mystical prologue of the Gospel of John. He says, In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with the Elohim, and the Logos was Elohim, or was an Elohim. It could be either way in the Greek. It was in the beginning with Elohim. The beginning of what? Obviously here, it's both literal history and prophetic history. Through it, all things came to be. The word all things are made is, again, a mistranslation. The word means a coming to be, like, well, the word is very close to Genesis. It's a coming to be out of something genetic. The word Genesis really starts with gin, which means woman. It's being brought forth as a child is brought forth in birth. Through it, all things came to be, that is the Logos, and without it, nothing came to be that came to be. In him was life, and the life was the light of humankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not mastered it or overcome it or overshadowed it or conquered it. Nobody knows what that word really means. But what's important here is that John is passing on to us a little code for when they believe Messiah was born into this world as Logos. In between the fourth day and the fifth, at the beginning of the fifth, between light and life. And of course, that's where John is getting this paradigm from, nowhere else. So that gives us an idea. If the fourth day is light and the fifth day is life, the fourth day extends to 1 BC if we start at 4,000. And the fifth day extends to 1,000 AD. The Logos is brought forth in the juncture of the two, end of the fourth day, beginning of the fifth. In him was life, and the life was the light of humankind. That makes it clear. In fact, it says in another place, down a little bit, that he dwelt among us. Again, the word there is enskeno, which means enskinned or tented among us, or as an older version has, tabernacled among us. This fits in perfectly with the light in life, because maybe John is saying that he came at the season of tabernacles, but certainly he's saying in a deeper meaning that he enskinned with us. And skinning would then imply that he came from somewhere else first and took on the skin of a human being and skinned to dwell with us. That's pretty clear by some of the authors of the New Testament, especially whoever wrote Colossians. He comes first as an image and likeness, perfected in the flesh. Then we have coming up to the 6th, 7th, and 8th days. There is an 8th day. Literal 7th day, as Genesis 2 saying, thus the skies and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the 7th day, Elohim finished his work, which he had done, and he paused on the 7th day. I know it says rested, but a better definition of Shabbat is pausing. These are the generations of the skies and the earth when they were created. We talked about cuneiform tablets before, and that these may well have been written on cuneiform, because at the bottom of every pericope, it has actually the title of what just happened. Just like the cuneiform tablets of Amarna and Ebla and what are the other ones? Just as they have. The index is at the bottom of the tablet. So here we have the generations of the skies and the earth, and of course that word again, geneo, a coming to be, a birthing. Prophetic 6th and 7th and 8th days, we have to go to Barnabas 15 and 16, understanding that Barnabas, the epistle to, not to be confused with the Gospel of Barnabas, was in the original earlier canon and is still a part of the Sinaitic manuscript, the oldest complete manuscript that we have of both Old and New Testament, including the Apocrypha. Barnabas tells us, moreover, it's written in the 10 words about the Shabbat, that Yahweh spoke to Moshe face to face on Mount Sinai, set aside the Shabbat of Yahweh with clean hands and heart. That's the 7th day. And in another place, Moshe says, no, Yahweh says, if my sons will keep Shabbatot, I will place my mercy upon them. He also speaks of the Shabbat in the beginning of creation. And Elohim made the works of his hands in 6 days and finished them altogether by the 7th day, in which he paused and he set it apart. Now, I've translated that from the Greek as literally as I could. Barnabas goes on to say, consider children. Children is an important word in this whole epistle. Consider what he says, children. He finished in 6 days. Yes, he tells us that in 6,000 years, Yahweh will make an end of altogether. He's speaking there of making an end of evil altogether in the context of the passage. For a day is as 1,000 years to him. He witnesses personally to me, saying, consider the day of Yahweh when a day will be as 1,000 years. Speaking again now in a prophetic context. For the day of Yahweh, we completed that last time. And I showed you in the prophets that we're talking about the day of the destruction of Israel. So my children, in 6 days, that is in 6,000 years, all evil we brought to an end, all decay. The text goes on to say, this he said, and he rested on the seventh day. That is, after his son comes, the era of the lawless is to cease. And when he judges the unrighteous and changes the sun, moon, and stars, then he will rest well on the seventh day. Again, he brings up the Genesis, the creation of lights, the fourth day. Further, he says, you will consecrate it with clean hands and heart. What is he talking about? Now he talks about, in his language, the seventh day. You will consecrate it. In all such matters, he says, we have been deceived. I guess so. Look, at such a time, we will surely be able to consecrate it and rest well, again on his seventh day, his 7,000-year millennium, especially since we ourselves have been justified and are receiving the promise. So when iniquity no longer exists and all things have been made anew by Yahweh, we will certainly be able to set it all apart, we ourselves being set apart first. He expands his dissertation to include the people of the earth during that seventh day. I hope I'm not reading too much into it. The present Shabbatot observed are not acceptable to me. Only that which I have fashioned will be acceptable. You could even read into that the two bloodlines there very easily. On my Shabbat, after setting all to rest, I will fashion the beginning of an 8th day, the beginning of another world. At the end of the 7th millennium, we don't know what happens. The scripture doesn't talk of that any more than it does tell us what happened before the first day, except it does tell us one thing, that the recreated and restored creation will be handed over to his Father as perfected at that time for his Father to do what he will. Even so, let us celebrate on the 8th day in which Yahshua appeared publicly out of death and ascended into the skies. The important word here is appeared publicly. At this time, believers that followed primarily Paul, but also I read this in Nazarene literature, that they kept 2 days, the Shabbat of rest and the first day, which was a day of fellowship. So in this first century, after the resurrection of Messiah, the literature starts to reveal that those believers were keeping both days, and they didn't call Sunday, or the first day either. We see it over and over as the 8th day. And as the 8th day, they saw this as a representative example of the beginning of another world. 16:3, he says again, look, those who have destroyed this shrine, in Greek that's neon. It usually is applied to the Holy of Holies rather than the temple. Neon and heron are 2 words that are applied to the temple. Heron is the temple proper, but the neon is the holy place, the shrine inside. And he says again, look, those who have destroyed this neon will rebuild it. And so it is done. For through their war, the enemy destroyed it. Now both they themselves and the enemy's slaves will rebuild it. He's talking after the destruction of Jerusalem, but not long after, because Jerusalem is still laying in ruins, not one stone upon the other. But he's predicted that those that destroyed it and their slaves, which is important because their slaves were the millions of Jews taken into slavery and shipped all over the world to be slaves, concubines, whores, and every other kind of worthless occupation for the Romans to please them. So he's predicting again that not only the Romans will build it up, but also that they will build up by means of the very ones who they came to destroy it. Barnabas, he tells us what they believe in this passage. The epistle is just outstanding. There's so much to it, but you've got to know the history. Also, Barnabas used to sit right after Revelation. That's where it is in the Sinaitic manuscript. Barnabas explains an awful lot of Revelation, a shame again for those Romans who took it out. Barnabas and his ilk believed that they were in the fifth day, 70 plus years in, that the day of Yahweh, number 2, even the destruction of the temple in the war had come and gone. By the way, the Romans did rebuild it after the second revolt, called it Aelia's Capitolina. And they put a temple to Jupiter on top of the Temple Mount. He also tells us that they believe that after 6,000 years, Yahweh will make an end of all evil. And at the end of 7,000 years, it will become another world as the Messiah turns the world back to his Father as perfected, for Father to do with as he will. These passages also tell us today, as though this text was more meant for us than them, that 4 very important events came to pass at the beginning of the the fifth day. First, the Word became flesh and dwelt or tabernacled or enskinned among us. Second, 30 years into the fifth day, the Word, the Logos, the Devar, prophesied that the day of Yahweh, which we showed last time is the destruction of the temple and all sinners with it, would happen in 1 generation. 1 generation being 40 years. And it did happen exactly 1 generation later in 70 AD. 30 years he prophesies. 40 years more to the very day the place is destroyed. And then finally, we read through the word children, through the book, that Barnabas is working the ministry of reconstituting the post-war Nazarene movement by less than 100 years in. You say, what happened to the Nazarenes? What happened to the Ebionites? Well, most professors think that they were all killed, or they went off and became Muslims later on. But we see here in this piece of literature, it's dated very early, that indeed this Barnabas was bringing the group back together again. So if Barnabas was 70 to 100 years into the 5th prophetic day or 5th millennium, what day in millennium do we inhabit? He as much as said that he was in the 5th day. Well, we're in the 7th millennium. That's called the millennium. And we take the gematrial essence of the years here, and we get the numbers 5, 30, 40, and 70. How do you like that, Liz? Even Javier marked those same numbers down in his book as perfection. Inevitably, when I declare this, someone's going to say, if this is the millennium, where is Yeshua? People just get absolutely shocked. And some of them, hatred fills their hearts when I say that he has already returned. Unfortunately, nobody will hear how I come up with that. It's not a recent thing. I've been teaching this since the last century. And sure enough, signs come forth every day. Where is Joshua? He's returned. But that's not to say he won't come a third time. Personally, my personal belief is that he did not ascend up to the sky, but ascended up to the temple to be declared clean by the high priests, just like he sent all other ones that he had healed to them, and that he ever lives to be an advocate for you. But I don't know that. We've sure had enough apparitions. And that's not to say that he is not coming again in our time. Certainly something's going to happen in this millennium that we have just gotten started in. And our movement has just gotten started in to bring forth that which Enoch says and Paul says concerning the sacred cosmic covenant and the vow of the Creator to restore all of creation. I talked to Liz on the phone yesterday on Zoom. When I got done talking to her, I had all kinds of ideas. When I was at Brenda's a couple months ago, I did not know what constituted helping to restore creation. I thought, should we start recycling? Should we stop throwing cigarette butts out the window? What should we do? But Liz gave me yesterday a much bigger dimension that has been rolling around in my head, and one that her and I will explain to you one of these days. I think this comes from Paul. Now, in the times and seasons, brothers, we do not need to write you, for you are fully aware that the day of Yah will come like a thief in the night. Who is Paul talking to here? If this is Paul, I can't remember. He's talking to the people around him, the believers around him at that time. He is not saying that the day of the Lord is going to come in thousands of years. He says, you're fully aware that it will come like a thief in the night. And why would he even tell them? Why would he even say, I would that you wouldn't get married or be like me, because the time is short? While people are saying peace and security, destruction will come upon them suddenly. That's exactly what was going on in Israel at that time. Like labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. This secret coming, some call it a secret rapture. That's exactly what it is, but not like they explain it. Look what we have for Messiah, who knew exactly what time. Matthew 24:42, again from the Olivet Discourse. Watch therefore, for you know not what hour your master does come. Why is he telling them to watch? He should say, don't worry about it. This isn't going to happen for thousands of years. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour wherein. But you don't have to worry about it, because They're going to say it comes in the 19th century and the 18th century and in the 20th century, in the 21st, and they're going to keep putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until they've got everyone scared out of their minds with their lies and false news. Mark 13:34 and 35, again, another piece of prophecy. For the Son of Man is as a man taking a far journey, who left his, and here he announces concerning his death. Will he find faith in returning? Will he return to find faith? Again, I say he did. 2 Peter 3:10, but the day of Yah will come as a thief in the night. Revelation 3:3, remember therefore how you have received and heard, and hold fast in a couple thousand years. Revelation 16:15, behold, I come. This is Messiah. I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches. Next, we have a couple more days. The last days are 6 and 7, day 6 and 7. It's plural. After the fifth day, the last 2 days are 6 and 7. The last day is 7. That's our day. But in his day was the day of Yah that is described as a day of blood and destruction. It is the day of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. We will go over that soon. Another day that's spoken of is the end times. Again, we have to say the end times of what? That is of Israel. Messiah comes. When the end times come, that is the day of Yahweh, when the retribution is to be poured out not upon the Gentiles, but upon those who would not listen, those that would not respect or hail the one that the Creator sent to them to save them. Then we've got the end of the age. This is also the end of the age. All these evangelists in the Gospels talk about that as being imminent, to happen at any time. You saw the numbers add up. Luke 12:39 is particularly appropriate. Understand this. If the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. Now, I think this part is John 10:8, and this is very revealing. Because John, the Gospel of John, and the Johannine literature in general have, in the less obvious layers, the very history of not only Messiah, but what is to happen unto the revelation. And you yourself can discern that the testimony of Yahshua, or the witness of Yahshua spoken of in Revelation, is in fact the Olivet Discourse, because the Revelation fulfills the Olivet to the letter, the Olivet being prophecy, the Revelation being apocalypse. All who came before me are thieves and robbers. You know who this is. But the sheep did not heed them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and go in and out and find pasture. Does that mean that they will be saved from the destruction of Jerusalem, say? In a way, it does. We'll see next in what way. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. If we parse that, we can almost see two groups of people here. The thief as Messiah coming to one, and to the other, those sheep who heeded his voice as a rescuer and a salvator. Because when he does come back, as we will see, he is with his armies on the top of Mount Zion, overlooking the destruction of all these people, not only in Israel proper, but the millions of people that were captured inside the Jerusalem walls that had no place to go but to be destroyed or put into slavery. What does Messiah do with them? He overlooks the destruction from Mount Zion. His army is there. And at the time, there are signs in the sky, if we get that far, that make it very evident what's going on up there is a mirror image of what was going on down there in Jerusalem. He comes as a thief to kill, steal, and destroy those who have killed, stolen, and destroyed his sheep. And we know who those are. He says so over and over again. But to those others who heed his voice, whom he loves and doesn't hate, oh, the Dead Sea Scrolls come in so handy here to kind of remedy us from some of this Christian nonsense that we have been told about the weak-wristed, limp-wristed, sissy Jesus. He is Yahweh Sabaoth, the commander of armies. He comes as a thief to them, but to his sheep as a deliverer. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays his life down for his sheep, and he did that. As I mentioned, the Gospel of John gives almost a chapter by chapter, maybe 2 vignettes in each chapter that have everything to do about Yeshua's second coming, if you can get down to that level. He even says the time is coming when the people would no longer be worshiping on Mount Gerizim. Remember, the Taheb was in town at this time, the Samaritan Savior that led the Samaritan holy people up Mount Gerizim to restore the temple up there that had been destroyed. Halfway up with the Taheb, the people were massacred by the Romans who met them halfway. Then there was, let's see, is Mount Moriah of the temple. He says to the woman at the well, realizing that that was his well, he was the inheritor from Jacob. As Jacob's well, it was his well. He had every right to be in Samaria at his well. And there is a woman that he uses to help us understand the historical picture of what was going to be happening here with the destruction even of the indestructible Jerusalem and its temple. You'll not be worshiping then either, because you're going to be worshiping in spirit and truth. He built a new temple. That new temple is his organism, his Yahad, his crowd that's in one accord with him, those that know his voice, those that follow him, those that do the work he does, those that do their best to stay unstained from the world. There's much more there in the Gospels that we don't have time to bring out of the closet right now, but every chapter has at least one, oftentimes two. Do you know of all the testimony in the Johannine corpus in which the master says he's coming like a thief in the night? Yeah. 5 different evangelists witness to this. He comes to save the sheep, but they have to die first. For those who didn't heed him, he came as a thief. He said as much. He's the agent of the day of Yahweh, an overseer of it. Now we go to Revelation for a little bit. Now we see in Revelation we have these saints, the Hagios, or the Hagioi, that are equivalent to the sheep that's spoken of in the gospel. And I have a string of verses here that tell the story of the sheep and to some extent the goats, starting at Revelation 6 and in chronological order. 6:9, when he opened the 5th seal, I saw under the altar the Sukain, the souls, literally the beings, all that's intelligent, all that makes a human being what they are. He's speaking in a figurative sense, understand. Under the altar means that they had been sacrificed. They're dead. Oh, sovereign, Yah, holy and true, how long before thou wilt judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell upon the earth? Does that sound like a good Christian? Our church wanted to throw out onward Christian soldiers out of the hymn book. It didn't fit the paradigm anymore. But there was such an outcry by the people in the church, literally millions called for them to change their mind, and they finally did. But in my church, that is a hymn that is no longer sung. It's still in the book, but no longer sung. Culture has changed the way we look at Messiah. We don't dare to look at him anymore as a man in command of a fatal army. Then they were given each a white robe. Who wore white robes at that time? Linen. And told to rest a little longer until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren should be complete, who were to be killed as they themselves had been. Everybody wants to be among the 144,000. But these are the saints that are being talked about here in Revelation 6. They're enumerated in Revelation 7. White robes, massacred. But as the sinners go to perdition and become nothing, become destroyed, these in a figurative sense are under the altar until the time of their retribution and their resurrection. Revelation 7. After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. There were still trees at this time. By the end of the story, there aren't any left. Think about why. Then I saw another angel ascend from the rising of the sun, not the moon, with the seal of the living Elohim, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or sea or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our Elohim upon their foreheads. These 144,000, a figurative term, are called to be sealed in this chapter. And it's an ongoing sealing. Everything is to stop until they are. These saints are the sheep They're going to be seen to first. The Romans are stopped. The Zealots are stopped while they were sealed. And they're sealed unto their death upon their foreheads. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000 sealed out of every tribe of the sons of Israel. 144,000. 1,000 means a lot in prophetic language. 12 is the number of elders. 12 is the number of apostles, according to chapter 4. Take those and multiply them together, you get 144,000. You want to be in the 144,000? Well, you can't unless you've been killed. You think that's for today? Well, it's not. Or there wouldn't be all these arguing about who is in it and who isn't. If they simply read the text, they would see that these people are to be martyred in the most violent way possible. Burned to death, died as a slave, thrown into the arena with wild beasts, or simply massacred wholesale in Jerusalem. Revelation 8:3. And another angel came and stood at the altar with a golden censer, and he was given much incense to mingle with the prayers of the saints from the hand of the angel before Elohim. Did you know that that was one of the most popular way to kill these people? By fire, especially to hang them up, pour petroleum or bitumen on them and light them up so they could see better at night in the gardens of the Romans, so they could see better at night in the camps while the Romans were drinking, or in Nero's garden. The smoke of the incense rose with the prayers of the saints from the hand of the angel before Elohim. Then the angel took the censer and filled it with fire from the altar, and he threw it on the land, not the earth. That's a different word. So one of the reasons we misunderstand Revelation so, because some words have been deliberately mistranslated for the very purpose of keeping this in the future and keeping the whole earth afraid. And there were peals of thunder, voices, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Number 4. The earthquake did indeed happen just before the destruction of Jerusalem. We talked a little about the Idumean army coming up to help the Zealots, and they were not let in the gates because there was an internal strife and civil war inside the gates between the three factions, the three frogs coming out of the mouth of the beast. They were left outside for a furious storm, Josephus records, and an earthquake. They had to endure an earthquake while the city was broken into 3 factions. When the Idumeans finally got in, they themselves destroyed as many people as they could and left. They had come to be allies, but Joshua had turned them against the sinners inside of there, who forced the common sinner to eat corpses and to starve or be otherwise tortured to death. "11. The nations raged, but thy wrath came, and the time for the dead to be judged, for rewarding thy servants, the prophets and saints, and those who fear thy name, both small and great, and for the destroyers of the earth or the land." Again, retribution for the judgment against the saints. And here we have in 13:5, the beast chapter. Later on, we'll do him. "And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. This was the exact time of the Neronic persecution, 40 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against Elohim, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in the skies. It also was allowed to make war on the saints and conquer them, and authority was given it over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. Understand that the beast isn't Nero. The beast is Rome. These beasts from 13, one has one head. That head at this time that sent the troops into Jerusalem was Emperor Nero, perhaps a friend of Paul, certainly a friend of Paul's friend, Seneca, guardian of Nero. Nero is said by Seneca to have received the books of Paul and not been very happy with them. But I'm thinking maybe from the books of Paul, Nero got his first victims, because there are some very high-minded people in Romans 16 and 2 Timothy 4. The head of the beast is Nero, but there's a second beast in there too. One with two horns that comes off the land. I'll have to wait till we get to 13, which will probably be next time. Everyone whose name had not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain. We're talking about those who would worship the beast, and they certainly did. They worshiped images of him. The Hellenistic Jews worshiped him. They gave sacrifices in the temple for him. The Romans themselves held the robes of the priests. It was an entirely corrupt system. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. 1.5 million went into captivity from Jerusalem alone into slavery. If anyone slays with the sword he must be slain. Again in Jerusalem, 1.3 million. There are nearly 3 million people in there. 1.3 million, if I remember my numbers right, were murdered or died of deadly diseases or hunger. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity goes. If anyone slays with the sword he must be slain. Here's a call for endurance and faith of the saints. He's not saying for the saints to take up arms. He's going to take care of it, the same way Elohim did in Habakkuk. Remember, he says, don't worry about it, Habakkuk, because I'm bringing somebody in to take care of these people. And then when they're done, I'm going to bring somebody else in to take care of them. And I'm going to be looking over the whole thing. What do you know? This is my plan. Revelation 14, the third angel. This will set off the Adventists. The third angel message. If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand, and I heard a voice from skies like the sound of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpers playing on their harps. And they sing a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth or from the land. What is that redemption? It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are chaste. You have to understand that symbolically. He's using symbolism from the Old Testament again to speak of idolatry, the same thing he said in the passage before. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind or humankind as first fruits for Elohim and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are spotless. I hate to think of what some of these lying teachers are going to get. Then I saw another angel flying in the middle, in the mid skies, with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. And he said with a loud voice, fear Elohim and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made the skies and earth, the sea and the fountains of water. This was the time, like we talked last time, where the language of Greek was the lingua franca for the whole Western world. These letters of Paul and many of the letters of the rest of the New Testament and letters of the apostles that we have lost, and books like the Didache and books like the Clementines were written in codex form, in a book form, inexpensive, durable, not scrolls. We had mentioned some time back that the word translated scrolls in Hebrew doesn't mean scrolls at all. It means any kind of written material. But this is high tech. These words went out and people believed because it was written in a language they understood and written in material that they could afford. There would be none to kill during a Neronic persecution if in the past 15 to 25 years, the gospel hadn't gone out to all nations. All right, we talk about the smoke of his torment. I'm going to skip some of these. You get the idea. Put in your sickle, gather the clusters of the vine. This is a very violent book because it's an apocrypha. He's telling what is happening then in coded language. It's encrypted, just like we encrypt email today. Then we go on to the woman arrayed in purple and scarlet, call her the whore of Babylon, holding a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of our fornication. And on her head was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Yahshua. When I saw her, I marveled greatly. Who's this woman? She was modeled after the Emperor Claudius' wife. Claudius was the uncle to Nero, and Claudius, mentioned in the New Testament Acts a couple of times, Claudius was murdered by his wife and his second wife, and then Nero came on the throne to do what he did. But Messalina, his second wife, Claudius murdered, had her killed, because when he was gone on a journey one time, she had a bad reputation. She had many customers. Claudius was taken with her beauty. One night when Claudius was in Britain, fighting the war in Britain, Messalina challenged the most notorious whore in Rome to a contest. Who can do the most in 24 hours, if you know what I mean? It was open to the public. It was a public display. Messalina won. The wife of the emperor, the empress, won. Her picture was on coins. She was like the first lady today. What if we had a first lady like that? When Claudius found out, and it wasn't easy for him to, she paid a lot of people off. He had her killed for adultery, only to marry Nero's mother, who poisoned him with a mushroom and killed him. So interesting, so violent. The beast that she rides on, if you read closely, it's a composite. Babylon the Great, the beast, in this particular instance represents both Rome and Jerusalem. Remember, it says she'll be burnt with fire and burn up and be a spectacle. It just so happens, after the burning of Rome, Rome burned once again in 68 AD, in the year of 4 emperors. At the end of 68, the last of the 4 emperors, or the next to last to come in, brought soldiers in and set Rome on fire. At the same time, Jerusalem was on fire. They were both on fire, being burned with fire. Read closely and you'll see that this symbolism here is for both cities, composite into one. And the woman that represented Messalina, the whore of Babylon, she was riding. And finally herself, she got burned. Is that a false religious system? I'd say so. The Judaism of that day was completely synthesized and syncretized to Roman and Greek religion. Now, what makes us think that anybody knew about this at the time? I want to end up here with, I skipped some of these that I need, but I'm going to go down here to Josephus to end up. Let me see where Revelation 12 is. Do I have that in here? Or am I lost? There's 12. Oh, here it is. Sorry. A great portent appeared in the skies. A woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, on her head a crown of 12 stars. Years ago, I was thinking of this. My Aunt Myrtle was a long time missionary in China, and during the Second World War, when the Japanese came to China, they were out to get her and were going to kill her for sure. They killed all missionaries in Hong Kong. And she had an orphanage there, a 3-story building, pretty racked up and ragged. I don't know if you ever heard of Ruth Heston or Ruth Heflin. Ruth Heflin, the famous Chinese missionary, learned under my Aunt Myrtle. The Japs came, knocked down the door. Myrtle went up to the 3rd floor until she had no place else to go. And she went into a closet. And she prayed in the last minutes, cover me with your pinions. Cover me with your pinions. She prayed fervently. The Japanese came in, ransacked the room, came to the closet after destroying the rest of the building, opened the closet doors. They looked right at her, but they didn't see her. She was spared in one of the worst missionary calamities that ever happened, the Japanese coming into Hong Kong, because she had been covered with pinions. What a miraculous story. And to hear her tell it at the age of 90 was marvelous. A woman clothed with the sun. I see the woman in Georgia at Callaway Gardens. I was there. And I see the sun over here. And I see the moon over here. They're on the same angle. And if they could both be seen, and a woman had her head in the sun and the moon under her feet, well, that has a lot to do with the calendar, but it also has a lot to do with the position that she's in. I saw the woman in the sky with her top parts in the sun and the moon under her feet. and she was in a birthing position, especially the birthing position that was used at that time. And I thought, now I see this woman, true Israel, is in the birthing position, and she brings forth a male child. Crying out in pangs of birth. You see, she's true Israel because she has a crown of 12 stars. And another portent appeared in the sky. Behold, a great red dragon. Okay, suffice it to say, there's a war here going on. And there's a war going on the land. There's one up here, and there's one down here at the same time. What the historian says is that, not knowing this passage, he and the rest of the people there, Romans and Jews both, witnessed prodigies. Josephus writes, besides these signs, and there were other signs before, a few days after the feast, on the 21st day of the month Artemisius, or ER, a certain prodigious and incredible phenomenon appeared. I suppose the account of it would seem to be a fable, were it not related by those that saw it, and were not the events that followed it so considerable in nature as to deserve such signals. For before sunsetting, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds in the surrounding cities. He was not a believer at this time, but Yahweh had him put this in descriptions of prodigies for us as just another little circumstantial proof. Moreover, at that feast, which they call Pentecost, as the priests were going by night into the inner court of the temple, as their custom was, to perform their sacred ministrations, they said that, in the first place, they felt a quaking and heard a great noise. And after that, they heard the sound as of a great multitude saying, let us remove hence. Where was that great multitude? On Mount Zion. A supernatural apparition was seen, too amazing to be believed. What I now would relate, I didn't do this before, did I? I imagine be dismissed as imaginary had this not been vouched by eyewitnesses. Is this the same thing? For before sunset, chariots were seen in the air over the whole country and armed battalions. I see. This is how Chilton renders it. Battalions speeding through the clouds and encircling the cities, exactly what the Romans were doing. Tacitus talks about this too. He's a Roman historian, a pagan, unbeliever. Prodigies had occurred, but their expiation by the offering of victims or solemn vows is held to be unlawful by a nation which is the slave of superstition and the enemy of true beliefs. In other words, the temple crowd. Tacitus knew exactly how to get rid of these prodigies by sacrificing goats and checking their innards, or sacrificing something. A sudden, wait a minute, in the sky appeared a vision of armies in conflict, a glittering armor, and a sudden lightning flash from the clouds lit up the temple. The doors of the holy place abruptly opened. A superhuman voice was heard to declare that the Elohim were leaving it. And in the same instant came the rushing tumult of their departure. Few people placed a sinister interpretation on this. The majority were convinced that the ancient scriptures of their priests alluded to the present as the very time when the Orient would triumph, and from Judea would go forth men destined to rule the world. Of course, Josephus prophesied that those men that went forth to rule the world were the generals that came and destroyed the country. In fact, they did rule the world. And I think I'm going to stop here and look into the chat. If you want to come back, we will get on to doing some identifications now that we've put the foundation in. Oh, Allison, you are getting so excited. Grew up as a Russellite. Russell agreed with this. Oh, everything is just, it's just too complimentary. I just can't read it. There we go. Nothing on there. Except Mom loved it. That is good. If I can keep getting these senior citizens in, and we got it made, because they're the holy ones these days. Any questions or comments? Well, thank you so much for coming. And I was not going to make this recording available, but just to a few people. This is going to go on premium content, Liz.
Well,
Love
I
you.
know I have questions and comments, but I'll wait, Jackson. I'll get better prepared.
I'm making a case,
I know.
little by little.
I'm listening.
Okay. Thank you all. Catch you next time.
Thank you.